Welcome to Educator Self-Regulate, a podcast for educational leaders, teachers, and students, where in less than 20 minutes, we unpack educational research to support you and your students to become better learners. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Educator Self-Regulate. Today, I am joined by the lovely Taleasha Bray from Bonython Primary School. I have to admit, Bonython Primary School is a long-standing partner of mine, and we've been on quite the journey. So it's so lovely to finally have a Bonython Primary School educator on the call with me here today. So Taleasha, welcome.
Thank you, Shai.
How are you today?
Good. A little bit nervous, but excited.
Well, I appreciate you being here. So Taleasha, tell us a little bit about your background, because I've known you as long as I've worked with Bonython Primary School. And from my perspective, you're a seasoned educator. How long have you been in the game for, and what's been your journey?
Yeah, so this is my 11th year teaching. I have now taught from kinder through to year 6. And for the past 6 years, I have been at Bonython Primary School.
Wow, okay, that explains why we've known each other the whole time.
Yeah.
Amazing. And I'm curious, because you worked across multiple year levels, your current cohort of students, year 5 and 6 students, how would you describe their self-regulated learning at the moment?
I think I'm pretty lucky. I've been on 5-6 at Bonython for the last 3, or this is my 4th year. And because we've been on the journey for the last 3 years, I think this year's cohort bring a lot of background knowledge in self-regulated learning. We haven't really had to start from scratch this year. They've already got that prior knowledge, the prior language. So it's been pretty good. They're a great group of kids, very diverse group of children.
You've raised a good point there. The time it takes to develop these capabilities, isn't it? Like, you've been working on this over a period of time. And while it's not, I always think about this, right? If we set on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being they're perfectly self-regulating their learning, and 1 being, I think it's kind of an ongoing continuum, like it's a journey, right? It's just constant improvement, and it takes time to develop this skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just been really lovely this year that they've come from a different group of teachers. Last year, especially our year 5s had different teachers in the 3-4 cohort, and they've brought a lot of strategies up with them that they've been able to teach our year 6s, and our year 6s are sharing a lot of the stuff we taught them last year in year 5. So yeah.
That's great. Now, Taleasha, you're also, just some context perhaps for our listeners, I work with and partner with Bonython Primary School in multiple ways. Of course, there's the all staff workshops that we do, but you're also involved in the focus group, a group of 6 to 8 educators in there, and they represent each of the teaching teams. We've got the lead educator in each of the teaching teams who's representing self-regulated learning for their team, who come together quite regularly to talk about and reflect on our progress and share challenges, and often share wins as well, right? I've seen a lot of those. But you've been in that role and on that focus group now for, has it been 3 years?
Yes, it is my 3rd year. Yeah.
Amazing. So, well, I'm hoping we can draw on your experiences through those different levels and share with us kind of how that has translated into your practice. So I guess an open question then, Taleasha, what strategies have you been playing with in your classroom to support your students to develop this skill set that we call self-regulated learning?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. So our entire Term 1 inquiry was based around becoming self-regulated learners. We very much built our inquiry around, in your book, actually, Educate to Self-Regulate, talk about the 3 key educational opportunities.
Yes.
And we've actually based our inquiry around that. So we very much started with students understanding themselves as learners. And that was all around building our knowledge of the way the brain works, sharing identity, what builds our identity, a lot of the relationship building stuff, and sharing a lot of the prior knowledge that we do bring as learners to the classroom. And then we managed to move into developing our repertoire of effective self-regulated learning strategies. And that's probably been the bulk of our shared inquiry this term. So we really unpacked like the 5 SRL categories, I guess we call them, in our classroom. So the metacognition, the motivation, cognition, the resource management, and emotion strategies. We shared what strategies we currently had and brought as learners to our classroom. And we've worked on building those over time, but then also adding new strategies in each week. And part of our team planning has very much been setting strategies that we would like to teach the students. And we commit to teaching the strategy or several strategies each week, and we're slowly building our repertoire.
Can I ask, because there's so much in there what you just shared, Taleasha. Has there been anything interesting that has come out of that activity in terms of the quality of students' strategic knowledge? Is there common strategies that they're all using, or are some struggling to generate a strategy for a certain category?
We definitely have identified a focus strategy for next term. I think the biggest thing we have struggled to identify strategies under is our cognition strategies. But obviously in 5-6, they all bring their own emotional regulation strategies. That's been really interesting. And we've done a lot of empathy building, and what works for one doesn't always work for another student. Yeah, a lot of unpacking of that.
Okay, so does that mean that in terms of your focus on strategy instruction for the next term, are they typically then cognitive strategies that you'll be focusing on just to kind of help populate, I guess, make sure that they've got strategies in each of the categories?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So hopefully the listeners are picking up on getting the students to generate those strategies is a fantastic diagnostic tool that you're using, which is now leading to you planning and
Yes.
deciding what strategies you might explicitly teach. How did your students in general respond to either that activity or even when you do explicitly teach them a strategy? Are they quite receptive to that?
They are quite receptive, actually. And obviously, some students independently apply strategies. We know other students take a little bit of pushing to try strategies, or a little bit of me regulating and telling them what strategies to try. But they have been really good at identifying when they need to apply strategies, and even just adding strategies to our board in the classroom. They've been really good at identifying, like, hey, this is actually a strategy. What we're doing right now is a strategy, Miss Bray. Can we add that to the wall? So they're getting really good at identifying when we are looking at new strategies. I don't often tell them that it's a new strategy at the very beginning. We usually learn, like, I teach it, we practice it together. And then at the end, I wait until someone realizes and we have that conversation and, like, oh, lovely. Now, which category does it belong under? Like, where can we put that? They're getting really good at that.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And do you find that once they've been explicitly taught a certain strategy, and I know in primary you're teaching them like across a range of subjects, really, isn't it? Do you find they transfer the strategies quite easily between those subject areas?
Absolutely. And it's been really nice that even some of our release role teachers who take students for different subjects, they're actually noticing some of the strategies that certain students are applying during their lessons as well. So we're definitely starting to see transfer.
That's brilliant, Taleasha. I've been following your journey now for a number of years, and I know this is not the first year you're dabbling with different approaches for teaching self-regulated learning, some that have been successful, some that have not been. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was last year I remember seeing a board with, I think this was your class, students' photos and their goals underneath.
Yeah.
Maybe tell our listeners a little bit about that, because I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. So was that our weekly strategy that we did?
I feel like you had your students setting SMART goals.
Yeah.
20 minutes where they could progress their SMART goals in SMART time. Is that right?
Yes. And it's funny because actually that's the third part in your book that you talk about, like deliberately practicing strategies in the classroom. And that is one thing that's been so successful in 5-6 before, is we spend time setting SMART goals for ourselves. Often it's a literacy-based goal, a maths-based goal, sometimes a personal goal in there that can be like hobby-based or anything of the student's choice, really. We schedule in our timetable 20 minutes after lunch each day, which we call SMART time, and they get to practice their SMART goals.
It's amazing. Is that structure still in place now, or was that a last year thing?
So that is actually one of our actions at the end of this inquiry.
Yeah.
We are setting our SMART goals this week, and it's already scheduled for next term.
So I just want to clarify. So with those, because I remember seeing these photos on this board and the student SMART goals underneath, but they were post-it notes from memory, and some had new post-it notes on top of old post-it notes.
So what we do each Friday, we would actually reflect on our goals, and we would basically use a traffic light system on them. So red was, I need to stop this goal. It's not working for me, or I need to stop this goal because I've achieved it. Yellow is like, this is a work in progress. And green is, I have fully achieved this goal. It's time to move on. So we would reflect, and then based off whatever color dot they added to their post-it note, they would either continue or set a new SMART goal for themselves.
It's fantastic because there's so many aspects of self-regulated learning in that process that you and the team have adopted there. Because A, you're explicitly teaching them how to set goals. B, they're actually activating a goal setting strategy and setting goals, but then they're in this kind of planning, monitoring, and evaluating process where they're actually weekly reflecting on their goals. It's a beautiful kind of engagement in that self-regulated learning process. I was so impressed when I heard you guys were doing that. And Taleasha, I've listed down here that I wanted to pick your brain on the planning template that you and your team have been using. Perhaps before we get into the planning template, is there any other examples of practice that you think would be really worthwhile sharing with our listeners?
Yeah, I did note down there's two others that I really love in 5-6 that I think work really well. So one other thing we've adopted is flexible learning, where the students actually get provided a timetable and certain things are set at specific times, but there are blank slots in their timetable where they're given a list of learning tasks, I guess, that they need to complete, but they get to assign and choose where they're going to complete each of those learning tasks. And during that time, the teachers tend to run small focus groups or just really small learning groups while other students are working independently. So I just think that's a really nice opportunity for students to be timetabling their own learning and having a chance to really independently apply the strategies that we've already taught and practiced without us sitting at the start of a lesson saying we're going to practice this strategy during this lesson. Or it's just a really nice opportunity for them to choose what strategy is going to work for them.
I think, yes, the flexible learning. I like that. And this is at year 6 where students are already starting to make, like, this is choice and autonomy, right? Like, you're giving the independence to say, hey, we trust you and we have high expectations of you that you can function in this flexible learning environment. And so I think it communicates high expectations, but it also creates a really nice learning opportunity for them to practice that self-regulating of them.
Definitely.
So was there another example there that you wanted to share?
The other example I'd love to share is our personal inquiry journey that we've been on, because I feel like that's been a very big part of 5-6 as well. So that's where students get to choose their own inquiry, and it's often driven by a passion or an interest, and it has an underlying theme of contributing. So they pick something to work toward or to work on, and they essentially set out how they're going to achieve the final point that they want to get to, and they guide their own inquiry of learning. I just think that's also another really good example and opportunity for kids to apply self-regulated learning strategies.
When do they do that, Taleasha? Like, is that later in the year once they've had a little bit more time to practice?
Often it is a little bit later in the year. This year we're being brave and we're going to start it next term, because I feel like this inquiry, our shared inquiry this term, has led so beautifully into starting personal inquiry. We've explored identity and we've explored all the SRL strategies. We're really building our banker strategies. It's just a perfect time for them to start practicing all those things. So next term.
Yeah, wow, amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, that's exciting. And actually, Talisha, you've prompted me to think about, because I remember us having a conversation about the desire to want to develop that repertoire of strategies for our learners, but also recognizing like how many strategies, like at what point does it tip over into too many?
Yeah.
And being really careful and strategic about that. But that's something I love about the way you and the team are thinking about this, is that your choice of strategies and the positioning of these inquiries, it's a lot of strategic decision making that's occurring in the background as an educator. And I think that's phenomenal. I hope other teachers are thinking like you are in the planning process, because there is a risk of just, okay, every day we're going to teach a new strategy because I told us explicit strategy instruction, and losing that connection to genuine intention. What is it that we're trying to develop here? You've identified cognitive strategies is like an area that your students need. So you're going to focus on cognitive strategies to help them develop that, as opposed to just saying, right, we're just going to randomly pick strategies every day to focus
Yeah.
in our Facing the Challenge unit, the one that Rory and I spoke about in one of the early episodes. Him and his team were very deliberate in over that 8-week unit. Only 4 strategies were they explicitly teaching and reinforcing over that time to be really, really clear for their students that those were the 4 strategies they wanted the students to develop. Okay, now I'm conscious of time, Taleasha. So let's get into the planning template before we get into on the reg, because this is now being rolled out across Bonython Primary School. So obviously what you've been doing, the team saw value in it. And so can you share a little bit about how you go about planning self-regulated learning into your curriculum, into your units?
Into our units, I guess. So each week we sit down as a team, and part of planning our shared inquiry, we actually plan for self-regulated learning as well. This year have implemented looking at the planning, monitoring and evaluating stages. So we plan what our focus is going to be for that week, and if we would like to look at a strategy that we've previously used, or if we'd like to implement a new strategy and practice that. We decide on that as a team and kind of set that as a goal. And then the following week, we come back and evaluate how did that go? Do we need to continue? Like, do they need another strategy in this area that we're looking at, or is it time to move on? It really just depends what the students are showing us. But I think this year, the most important thing we've brought in is that evaluation and really analysing what the kids are showing us and where we need to go to from there.
So as a team, almost like, if we use the word assessment, even though it's probably more formative assessment than it is any sort of formal kind of assessment, proactively thinking about, well, how are the students progressing in their self-regulated learning capabilities? And therefore, do we need to continue with this a little bit further, or do we change tack?
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, well, Alicia, I don't think I have a photo of the planning template that you are currently using in the book, but and I don't know if it's possible, but I'm sure our listeners would love to see an example of that. So if you have one that you're willing to share, I can always tag in like an image or something like that into the podcast description notes.
Definitely, I'd be happy to share that. I think one of the most important reasons we've done it this year is so that we have the carryover in following years. You know, one thing we really missed, I guess, the last 2 years is knowing what the students have learnt with the teacher before us.
Yeah.
So that we can just build on that rather than start from scratch. And yeah, being in our 3rd year doing it, I think that's something we identified we really needed to move forward. It's been really helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Taleasha. Okay, well, let's get into on the reg, Taleasha. So as you know from listening to the podcast, we have this lovely little segment where we share our own personal strategies for self-regulated learning. So Taleasha, what strategy do you use to self-regulate?
So my current strategy is I'm going to call the power of yes. I spent this term exploring our zones, I guess, our comfort zones in my classroom. So we looked at what was in our comfort zone, what was in our growth zone, and we talked about the importance of the growth zone and our stress zone. And yeah, I guess self-reflection, I'm very good at getting the kids to expand their comfort zone by taking on challenges in their stretch or growth zone, but I'm not great at it myself. So I have committed to saying yes to things I would usually say no to or hide away from.
And that is why you're here on the podcast today, isn't
That
it?
is exactly why I'm here.
Appreciate that, because you shared that with me on an email, and I just thought how amazing that you are walking the talk, really, isn't it? I mean, it's true, right? We often encourage students to take risks and to challenge themselves, and yet, in terms of our own individual adult learning, are we, yeah,
It's challenging.
I'm sure there's a lot of teachers in our audience who would benefit from the strategy that you just shared. I will share one that I'm not sure if I've shared it before, but something that I do. Taleasha, I don't know about you. Do you use lists at all? I used to use lists, and I used to find lists were quite overwhelming because, they just never ending. Yeah,
Yes.
time you ticked off 3 things, there's like 5 more things on it. And so what I ended up shifting into, I use Outlook Calendar, and what happens is when someone asks me to do something, there's, I guess, now it's become quite an automatic process where I'll go, okay, how much time does this task require? And you've got to be quite good at estimating time for a task. And I always add a little bit more because I know that I underestimate tasks always. I think that's a human condition. And so, I'll say, okay, great, that's going to take me an hour to do, right? I'll look at my calendar and I will literally find a chunk of time in my calendar and I'll say, right, this is the hour that I'm going to work on that thing that Taleasha told me to do. At which point I'll know very clearly whether or not I can get it to you by the deadline. And I'll go back to you and I'll say, Taleasha, I know you wanted it by the end of the week, but there's no chance now that's going to happen. Any chance I can get it back, get it to the end of next week. And so what I find is that my calendar is quite an active list. And because I'm estimating time as I put it into my calendar, I have generally a better awareness of time than anyone who uses the list. Because I can see all the things in my calendar and I can go, wow, this is a huge week. Some of this, one of this is essential, and one of this can be delegated or deleted, etc., so on and so forth. And there'll be some things that I naturally find that each week I'll just kind of drag things like, I didn't get to that. I'll move that to next week. I'll move that to, and something like 3 weeks later, that same item is still being moved. I clearly don't care about it enough. I'm just going to delete it. I'm not even going to do it. And I'm going to tell the person, I'm sorry, this is just not essential for me right now. Like that's the reality. And so it's quite an interesting process, but it's definitely given me a greater awareness of time. And I think that's something that we all struggle with. All right. On that note, Taleasha, it has been such a pleasure having you on the podcast. I'm so grateful to you being here. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
If you are a new listener to the podcast, make sure you share it with friends, save it, or subscribe. If you have any questions, and we really want to hear from our listeners, if you have any questions or comments, send us a DM through either of our social media channels, which is Twitter and Instagram @ed2selfreg. As always, to you and everyone else out there, keep regulating.